Good morning again, everybody. My name is Anthony Williams. I will be the moderator for this webinar this morning. And with us, we have Anthony Nwosa, who is the Group Head, Supply Chain Management for Oilserve Limited. Our theme for this webinar is Revolutionizing Procurement, Smarter Vendor Selection with Data. And it is hosted by Dun Bradstreet Nigeria. A few housekeeping rules. This webinar is being recorded and all lines are muted by the organizer so we can have quiet and go through the webinar. We would have a session for Q&A at the end. Please submit all your queries and concerns through the chat box window. And if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A box during the webinar or during the session for Q&A, please raise your hand using the Zoom feature and the host will unmute you. D&B, the host of this webinar, will also share the webinar recording after the webinar. And if you would like to reach out to the guest directly, please send an email to marketing@dnbsame.com so we can directly link you to Mr. Anthony. The agenda and program for this webinar is this, and we would like to, as much as possible, complete this by 12 noon today. We know that everybody is joining most likely from work and would like to return to work as soon as possible. So we'll do the best we can to ensure we do not drag this beyond this time. A brief introduction. Our speaker is Mr. Anthony Nwosa, who is a seasoned supply chain executive with over a decade of experience optimizing procurement and supplier management across global markets. He has led country-level operations at ACA Solutions and Niger Star 7, managing suppliers across Europe, North America, Asia, and Africa. As the group head of supply chain at Oilserve Group, he drives strategy, sustainability, and efficiency, pioneering innovative procurement models that integrate technology and ESG frameworks. That's environment, sustainability, and governance. He's a thought leader in Nigeria's oil and gas sector. He had deep expertise in local manufacturing and sourcing challenges, so he's in a very good position to expound the topic to us. I am Anthony Williams. I'm a business leader with over a decade experience in strategic planning, customer success, and business growth. I've been driving market expansion, building high-performing team, and turning complex challenges into opportunities. I hold an MBA in production and operations management, and I'm passionate about helping businesses achieve sustainable growth and profit. So to take us further, Mr. Anthony, please, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Atinuke, and good morning to everybody. Please confirm you can hear me. Just give a thumbs up to confirm that you can hear me while I share my screen.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen now, and let me know when it's up on you, when you can see it.
Still loading.
Is the presentation up now?
Not yet. Yes, okay. It is.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so thank you, Atinuke, once again. So today we'll be discussing smarter vendor selection with data. And I'll do my best to condense what it is I have to share within the next 20, 30 minutes at max. And I'm hoping that at the end of this webinar, you must have learned something that you can immediately take back and implement in your various organizations. Okay. So the content for today, we'll define some terms, for example, data, selection, and just to bring you up to speed with the subsequent slides when we go a bit deeper discussing these concepts. There will be a bit of setting the context so that you understand the background. When it comes to vendor selection, there's a mindset that you should have as a procurement specialist or as a business owner. So we'll define and set the stage in that context. We'll discuss the selection stages as far as vendor selection and management is concerned. I will introduce you to this approach to vendor selection. I mean, the actual sense is not an introduction, but something you already do subconsciously, and I will show you how. And then we'll run through the role of data and vendor selection and performance management just to show you how you can implement what we would have been discussing leading up to that part of the presentation. And then we'll summarize the key takeaways, and then we'll have time to take your questions. So if you have any questions, please just post them in the chat box or take note of them until you get to that part of the presentation. Okay, so very quickly, if you would just take to the chat box and respond to the question that's showing, how do you currently select your vendors? So in the different businesses that you manage or where you work, how do you select your vendors? Is it A, B, C, D? If you could take the next few minutes to respond to this. You could respond to the chat box as well. So, Anthony, if you could please check and let us know what the majority of response is. Is it referrals, or are people already using data analysis?
Most people are using experience. A has been the, yes, A and B. Some selected A and B, but mostly A.
And B. Okay, mostly A. So your own experience, and then B is referrals, which is the experience of other parties, of third parties. So that's fine. So we'll delve a bit into it, and then we'll see how data analysis can also be something that you could depend on to make this decision. Okay, so let's go on. So let's just define strictly data. So data basically is raw parts. Data by itself does not convey meaning. In order for data to convey meaning, it needs to be put within a context. And then that is how you process data into an information. Okay, so it is the foundation for analysis, knowledge transfer, and decision making. It's just the foundation. That's the first thing you need. But in order for you to be able to make any decision from the data you collect, you must put it within a context, and then for it to convey the intended meaning. And then so basically 3 stages, if you'd like: data, information, knowledge and insights, and then you can then make your decision. And so in 2 broad senses, all of the data that you collect can be broadly categorized into 2: quantitative and qualitative. And during the course of the webinar, I'll be showing you examples of both and how we collect this information in order to make vendor selection decisions. So example of your quantitative data would be the pricing, anything that can be quantified and be defined by numerical values. So things like delivery timeline, lead time, is it delivering in 6 months, 4 months? All of those could influence your selection criteria, and that is quantitative data because it has been quantified, right? On the other hand, you could also have qualitative data, which is basically when you're asking for perhaps licenses and permits. Okay, you want to do this job for me, I want to see that you're licensed to do it. So it is descriptive in nature, and it could be reviews that you read online about that particular vendor. It could be information you're receiving from your referrals that is not quantified, but just descriptive. Those would form your qualitative data. So these 2 together forms the basis for which information that you depend on to make your vendor selection decisions. So we understand that when we say data, we're not just talking about numbers. There's also the text bit of it that forms part of this. Now, why is data important? Of course, to drive this business decisions. And then if you collect data over time, it could establish pattern recognition, and on that basis make decisions, and then you can automate. And so I know that there's this whole AI that is buzzing everywhere, and it is basically dependent on data that is collected over time that has established pattern and is able to predict outcomes. Okay, that's basically what it is in very simple terms. And then, of course, research for policy making, data is really also very important. And I would like to add one more point. If you know, one of the key issues in supply chain management is we have very ethical concerns. And one way to manage the ethical risk in the supply chain is to depend on data and minimize discretion. So when people are making decisions about how they feel and all of that, it could easily be skewed or biased. But in order to take the human element out of it, to ensure that you have more ethical supply chains and more ethical decision making, it's very helpful to depend on data. Okay. So another thing that I'd like us to discuss, just so that we have common understanding as we go through this presentation, is selection. Now, the theme selection is quite broad, right? And I would like us to look at selection in three broad categories. There's a slide after this that explains this in detail. But the three broad steps will be pre-qualification, which is what do I do in order to admit this vendor into my system, okay? The next is, what are the conditions in order for this vendor to be bidding for a job? And the third stage is, what are the criteria for me to award this job to this vendor? So 3 stages. Now, vendor and supplier is always used interchangeably many times. And so for the course of this presentation, so that we can situate exactly what we mean, I'd like to distinguish between these two, okay? And let's say vendor would be referred to as the provider of goods and services. So anybody who is providing goods and services anywhere will qualify that entity as a vendor. And then once you've qualified that entity and you've selected that entity to provide your organization, a good or a service, you've started the contractual dealing with this vendor, you can then say its vendor has transited to becoming your supplier. So supplier means that there's active relationship between your company and this third party, and vendor just means that, oh, that's just a third party that provides goods and services. So let's just agree on these broad terms for the sake of this webinar so that we're on the same page as we progress. Now, it's also very important for us to set the context. As far as vendor selection is concerned, and as far as dealing with the third party is concerned, there's this caveat emptor. I know we see it in different places. Some people write it on a piece of land when they're trying to say, this land is not for sale, caveat emptor. Caveat emptor simply means buyer beware. And it is a fundamental principle in commerce and contractual relationship between a buyer and a seller. Okay? Now, what does this mean for you? What it means is that the courts or any dispute resolution institution would by default expect that the buyer in any relationship has the duty to conduct due diligence. Okay? So as far as anybody can come to you and say, I provide any goods and any service, okay, whether I have the capacity or not, and it is for the buyer to establish that this third party that I'm speaking to have the capacity to execute what they're claiming to do. So it is your duty, it is your responsibility. And so if you are found wanting, you could have compromised your chances to make any successful claim against this third party in the event that there's a dispute. So this is very important. The risk, majority of the risk rests with the buyer when you get into a buyer-seller relationship. Okay? And that's why you need to pay more attention to how you select these vendors, because the entire risk in that relationship, as far as the position of the law is, rests with you as the buyer. So that's important to note. And what we're discussing here today is not trivial at all, right? 60% of companies report supply chain disruptions due to unreliable vendors. And that's a report from McKinsey, 60%. So it's an issue that is dominant as far as supply chain is concerned, right? And poor vendor performance increases procurement cost by 15 to 25%. And that's by a report from Deloitte. So these are this is a very important business concern topic. And I hope that you get value from this webinar as we progress. So bad vendors, basically, they don't just disappoint you. Dealing with a bad vendor costs you real money, right? and could also cost you even more than money to lead to reputational damage as well. And in the same way, dealing with a proper vendor who has capacity and know what they're doing could actually be the basis for why you'll be winning and awarding jobs. I've gone into several tenders that I know for sure that one of the influences to the decision that awarded that contract to my company was based on the capacity of the subcontractors that I put forward to work with. So making that decision is really key. It could be a sort of revenue, it could also be a cost center for information. So this is really, really important. Okay, so let's just take a few seconds to delve into this pool. So I'll ask, which of these is your best challenge when managing vendors? The biggest challenge, apology. So from your experience in managing vendors and dealing with vendors, what's your biggest challenge? Verifying vendor credibility, keeping vendor data up to date, access to alternative suppliers, monitoring performance over time. What's your biggest challenge? If you could use those to respond. I said, okay, what do we have? What's the dominant feedback?
Most people chose verifying vendor credibility.
Verifying vendor credibility. Okay. Yeah, I can relate to
and
that.
access to alternative suppliers.
Access to alternative suppliers. Yeah, I can relate to that as well. So yeah, these are some of the issues. Yeah. Okay, so we'll progress. Just a moment, please. My slides are very slow. Has the slide changed in your end? Because this seems to be stuck here.
Not yet.
Oh yeah.
Yes, network.
Okay. Let's now delve into the selection stages. Please confirm that you can see the slide up on your screen is selection stages. Hello?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. All right. So, I touched on this in the earlier slide, speaking about the three broad stages. Now, depending on your business and the scale of your business and the type of your business, you might not necessarily have to go through these three stages. It's also possible that in some instances, the first and the second stage could be collapsed. But basically, this is like the filter through which you get to determine the vendor to work with. This is real for my industry, for example. So first of all, you have your supply management database from on a daily basis, weekly basis. As a result of events, conferences, you get to meet different service providers. And then you do like a pre-qualification. The pre-qualification is just a broad filter to say, okay, you have a fabrication, you have expertise in fabrication. Okay, send me the details of the equipment you have, your company profile, where the fabrication is happening, the layout, and all of that. And then the vendor fills in all of the forms. If it's a vendor that you need to do due diligence on, you do the due diligence, do everything. Then you say, okay, I'm pre-qualified to provide this service to X. So that's the first stage. And then that vendor is pre-qualified into the database. Then company X now has a need for that particular service, for that fabrication. But perhaps it has up to 5, 6, 7 companies that have registered and said that have fabrication capacity. Now, for example, if your supply chain has a bit of regulation by the government, for example, for us, depending on the spend, right, you have to reach out to all the companies in the government's database NIPEX. Everybody who has registered in NIPEX, for example, for that particular service, you have to reach out to all of them, right? So many times it's not just left to your organization. If it is regulated, like the oil and gas industry, you also have a third-party database to refer to. So everybody who has been pre-qualified, you then have to define like a bidder's list. So sometimes bidder's list is not up to you, it's regulated. But some other times you then need to narrow down to a bidder's list, right? So in narrow down to a bidder's list, you can send out what is referred to as an RFI, which is a request for information, where you go into detail to see whether these guys are actually equipped to provide exactly what you want. Yes, you could have a fabrication yard, but your yard might not have the capacity to fabricate exactly what I want. So qualifying as a fabrication yard is not enough. So you narrow down based on your request, and then narrowing down to this. There are so many things that come to play, right? Because we are dealing with many times we have 100 vendors at the pre-qualification stage. Sometimes it's the financials that help you to narrow down to a business stage. So contract could say, for whoever is doing this scope of work for me, I need a financial bond of $1 million. That immediately screens a lot of companies because they cannot provide that bond. And then you narrow down to a bidder's list, who then get your request for quotation, and then they then go for the final bid process for which an award is made. So broadly speaking, when we say selection, and think about it as these three stages, but I'll try to be distinct as we go. Now, it is very important, the pre-qualification stage is very important because this is your first risk management gate. So as far as managing your supply chain risk is concerned, whatever companies have been admitted into your database as a provider of goods and service, you are already at risk if you fail at this first point, right? Because you already have trust, as it were, with your wheat, right? So that's a very important gate to pay attention to. And so now, when we go into vendor selection and dealing with third parties, what's the approach? Now, this is something that I want to point out because, and I'll give an example. For example, if I need to buy a pen, I just walk into a shop, go to the books shelf of the store. I get a pen. I just want to make sure that it works. So I scribble, and as long as it works, I pay and I leave, right? So the due diligence that I do is basically to scribble and to make sure that that pen works. Now, if I was going to buy a car, right, I'll not just walk to a store and pay for a car and move. First of all, I need to ask for referrals. If there's a particular car that I like, I need to ask for referrals for those who are already driving that car. How does the car function? What's the fuel consumption? Blah, blah, blah. In the event that is not a brand new car, I am going to buy a foreign used vehicle. Many times, even with a mechanic, right? I will tell the mechanic, please check that this car is not accidented. Some words try and get the history, maintenance history of this vehicle and all of that. So you can see that the level of due diligence that I have done is more than just scribbling a pen on the paper, right? And then if I was going to buy real estate, for example, of course, I'll ask for documentation. What documents does this real estate have? If it doesn't have a C of O, a government's consent, I might decide not to buy, depending on my risk appetite, right? If it does have, I'll go and verify at the land agency and all whatnot. And then there are certain locations that are notorious for selling a land to more than one buyer, right? If you're in that situation, you might decide, okay, before I pay you the full payment for this property, I want to go and tip off sand on this land. If nobody comes out to claim ownership, and I know that it's actually going to pay. So you see that the level of due diligence has increased and is way different from the pen. So this is basically what we do every day on a daily basis, right? But for some reason, when it comes to dealing with suppliers at work, a lot of organizations that I've seen just adopt a flat approach. They're asking for the same things regardless of the criticality of what it is that they're buying. And what a flat approach does is either it's an overkill or it is not just enough. So what our advice is always try to reflect what you do in real life when you're making a purchasing decision. Try to tailor it to a risk-based approach. The slide I have here is basically suggesting that, right? And you have to be calculated. It doesn't matter that you call them 012, you can call them whatever you want. But the message here is, as much as possible, try to break them into categories. This might not be totally relevant depending on your business. And maybe you don't need 3 categories, maybe 2 would work. The whole idea is try to tailor your vendor selection process to the risk of what you are buying, right? It's really, really important. Avoid using a flat approach because you don't even do that on a day-to-day basis. So an example of tailoring this and what you do. So typically, a lot of us here are, many times we stand as buyers, some other times we stand as sellers. So a lot of organizations play both roles. Many times you need to buy in order to sell. So you stick right in the middle, right? And so a lot of us have had experiences, even though some of us are buying sometimes, to actually register to sell. And there are typical documents that you're asked to submit. Certificate of incorporation, CO2, CO7, and memorandum of association, and your permits, your financial documents, your experience, key list of equipment, and all of that. So we're used to this. What I have here is just an example of what could be made mandatory depending on the criticality of whatever it is that you're buying. So the higher the criticality, you can see criticality 3 is ticking all the boxes of what has to be checked. Now, I'll give you an example because, many times, one thing is using data and information. Another thing is having data and information. Another thing is how do you use the information before you to manage the business risk, right? So, for example, memorandum of association. Everybody asks for memorandum of association. It's submitted. A lot of organizations just tick, oh, they have CO2, CO7. Oh, they have certificate of incorporation. They have memorandum of association, and that is fine. But that is exactly not what it should be. Having the information is not enough. The thing is, how do you interpret it to manage your risk? And I'll give you an example. We don't have time to get into this in detail, but I'll give you an example. So the document, memorandum of association, is part of the documents that you get when you're incorporating a company. And in that document, you get to state the business or service that you intend to provide, right? Now, let's say for Company X on this document, they've gone to the government and they've gone to register to the government as a fashion house. So we want to provide fashion services. And that is the basis for which they were incorporated as a business. Now, you as an organization, you get into a business relationship with this company. They've submitted a memorandum of association, but you didn't pay attention to what was there. Maybe you looked at it, you didn't even understand what it meant. And then you award a civil construction job to this company. This company starts to construct a 4-story building and the building collapses. The question is, and remember the context we painted in the beginning, which is caveat emptor, buyer beware. The question now is, when the litigation process starts, are you able to fully claim against this entity when you've contracted with a fashion house to build a 4-story building? I'll leave that to you to take that away, and I hope that the meaning has been conveyed. The second example that I'd like to buttress here is financial statement. A lot of us also ask for audited accounts. We have the information, we have the data for the past 3 years, and we just look at it. Some companies just, oh, they have audited accounts, and that is enough. They don't go into the analysis of looking at the numbers and saying, what does this mean for my business? What is the liquidity of this company? How indebted are they? Is this company a going concern? What is the asset base of this company? Now, asset is really important because as an organization, that's what you have to claim against. So let's say that the total assets of a company is 3 million naira. So all the assets they have, the computer, everything they have that they qualify as assets that they've reported in their balance sheet is 3 million naira. And then you enter into a business relationship with this company and you're awarding them a project of $100 million. This is a limited liability company. It means that all their risks are limited, and you cannot claim against the owners of the company. You can only claim against the assets of the company. Now, something goes wrong. You've been awarded a claim of, let's say, $5 million, $1 million. You have no means to claim against this company because their total assets, including cash, including tangible goods, everything they have, and they've reported to you before you awarded them this job, is only 3 million naira. And what I'm telling you is not fictitious. I've done selection. I've received emails. Oh, we've concluded with this company. We want to award this job. When you go into the details of the numbers of the company and you see the amount of job they're awarding to this company, there's a mismatch, right? And so that's why it's important to also categorize your vendors according to the risk. And so that you are dealing with companies who have the right asset base that you can claim against, and you need to tie that to the contracts that you're entering into. This is really, really important, and this is how you should use the data that you collected and the information you have to make your business decision and your vendor selection decision. These are really important. Everything that we ask for in supply chain practice during vendor qualification conveys a meaning. They all are meaningful. It is not just a tick the box exercise. You need to understand exactly what it means and how you should interpret those in making your decision. It is really, really, really key. Now, I'll leave you with this. As a business, you should define mandatory requirements. You need to come up with a policy to say any company I'm going to deal with must meet X, Y, Z as a minimum. You do not want to award an environmental cleaning job to a company that doesn't have a license from Ministry of Environment. If they take that waste and dump it in the river rather than processing it, you are liable. Remember, caveat emptor. The law would always come for the biggest party in that chain of contracting. It doesn't matter that you've awarded them the job. What level of due diligence did you do? Did you check that they had the right licenses? So you must define mandatory requirements. If you want to qualify to provide me this service, you must have this documentation, otherwise I can't deal, right? And then you should also predefine waiting for each criteria. Once you define, okay, these are all the things that I need. If it has this, what does it mean? Am I weighing it 30% or 5% or 2% or 3%? Why it's important to do this is that it takes away the bias from the decision making. At the end of the day, the numbers tell you, the data tells you this is a go or this is a no-go. And so you're taking away that human element of bias and from your entire prejudice from the entire process. So these two things are really important as far as using data to select your vendor is concerned. Okay, so this is a typical example of how a company that has used a weighted mechanism for vendor selection. But this slide is here to point something really out for us as far as vendor selection is concerned. You can see the first line item, which is cost, is looking at commercials already. And you can see that from this company, the commercial is weighing 5, meaning that this is a really important decision maker for this organization, right? In terms of the weighted average. And they've used that to develop the scorecard. Now, what you have in the column labeled blue doesn't really matter. You can define this based on what is important to you. It will not be the same for every organization. It will also not be the same for every transaction. So your supply chain professional should be able to define what is important for each contract, especially for your high-ticket contract, okay? But why this slide is here to point it out is you can see that this company is looking at technical as well as commercial at a single go. This is a no-no, right? By best practice, you should freeze your technical evaluation before you consider your commercial evaluation. So everything that qualifies that company on technical grounds to provide that service should be frozen and evaluated independently of the commercials. And that's why you have that note there. Avoid merging your technical bid evaluation with your commercial bid evaluation. Because what happens is immediately you open your commercials with the technical, you would be skewed to the cheapest bidder. And then you run the risk of awarding a contract to a company who is the cheapest, but perhaps lacks the capacity or the documentation or something that is really important to execute that project. They can tell you, oh, this has expired. We'll process it, we'll do this, we'll do that. And because you've seen that they're way cheaper, you are tempted to make the wrong decision. So you need to close your eyes on the commercial and consider the commercials for only those that have certified all your technical requirements. This is really important. So this scorecard is here just to show you a way not to use data to make a selection decision. Okay, so this is really important. And I believe that this is the last slide that we have for today before we summarize. Now, in decision making, in terms of vendor selection, you have instances where you deal with a vendor more than once. That is typical, right? And so, in terms of recurring business, what kind of data should you collect in order to make an informed decision? Now, in the beginning where we had the icebreaker, a lot of companies said, oh, we rely on experience. To terminate the contract. So for that particular deal, time is key. Now you have two suppliers, right, that have the capacity to deliver. You go to your vendor management database and you're focused on, okay, in the past 2-3 years or in the past 6 months, have they delivered on time? If you take a snapshot and perhaps one person is at 70% in terms of video, 80% or 70%, another person is at 67%. Okay, if you use that snapshot, you are tempted to go to 70% because it's higher than 68%. But when you look at the trend could show you that this guy that is at 70 used to be at 98 months and is now at 70. This guy who is at 68 used to be at 40. But over the past 6 months, he has steadily improved his time delivery and is now at 68. Having the view of the trend helps you make more informed decision and selection for that particular activity. Because performance could be an indication of what is happening in that organization. There could have been a management change, a key personnel could have left, something could have happened, ownership could have changed, processes could have changed, and that is what is being reflected in that performance, right? Now, you might not have visibility over what's happening in that organization. All you're doing is that you are logging each time the vendor is performing, and that is the only view that you have. And so you see that in a situation where you see a drastic improvement, you'll probably be more comfortable going with the guy who has been steadily improving rather than the guy who has been steadily declining, right? And so that's how vendor performance management and the data that you collect will also influence decision make. The key here is focus on the trend, not just a snapshot of what the performance is at that point in time. So we'll quickly take another pool. If you can see what's on my screen, please quickly just respond to the pool. If you had to choose one primary factor when selecting a vendor, what would it be? Cost, reliability, compliance, and risk status, diversity, and sustainability profile. There's no wrong or right answer here. Just choose. Let's just see what comes to you as a default setting. So, if you can tell us what's dominant in the responses we see.
Okay, B, reliability is top.
Reliability is top. Fantastic. I'm happy to see
Followed
that a lot of
by,
people.
yes.
Yeah.
Followed by compliance.
Absolutely. Okay. I'm super impressed that a lot of people have learned to look beyond just cost, right? Compliance and risk status, reliability, fantastic. Yeah. I think that this should be dominant in any decision making. In terms of compliance and risk would always be a feature that should be considered. So for different contracts, for different dealings, different indices will be more important than the other, depending on the client, depending on the project, depending on the nature of work to be done, depending on the duration of the service and all whatnot. But yeah, I agree that compliance and risk status is important, and this should endure regardless of whatever contract nature it is that you're dealing with in terms of the vendor selection. So thank you for participating in that. We'll just move on. How are we doing with time, Anthony?
Just a few minutes, and I think we'll just go into the vendor presentation and take time for Q&A.
Okay, great. So let's just wrap this up here then. So basically, this is what I want to leave with you as a form of a refresher of what we've discussed. Data by itself conveys no meaning. So you can see the example. Somebody can come to you, rain 70%, tomorrow umbrella. What does it mean? This is raw data, right? You need a context for it. You need to process it, put it into a context for it to convey meaning. So you could then have, don't forget the umbrella tomorrow. There's a 70% chance of rain. Within the context, the rain 70%. Tomorrow umbrella has now been put within a context that conveys the meaning, right? And then you can make a decision to say, oh, so that. And then not in terms of the insight derived and what I want to leave you with is that as a business, you need to, if you don't have it now, and I'm not saying every business should to immediately jump into this and start to spend money on the ERP. It has to make sense for you. But it's really, really super important. You can't run a sustainability business. I can't see the possibility of running a sustainable business that will endure without leveraging digital tools to aid the management of your vendor performance and selection. And the last slide I showed you, the dashboard of vendor performance. That's what you get when you invest in a proper ERP. And then making decisions for an ERP to use, you should be thinking at the level of analysis that tool can offer you, storage, possibility to predict. That's what we mentioned about data privacy, data security. All of these are really risks that are associated with using ERP. So it's not all roses. There's some risk associated with that. So you need to make sure that you're dealing with the companies that can assure data privacy and security. That's really important. But in terms of running a sustainable business, you need to start to think, if you don't already have, to digitize your vendor management tool. Again, we touched on this before. Do not forget, it's important to complete your technical evaluation before opening up the commercial. Otherwise, your vendor selection will be screwed, could be screwed. And then, so you've done the first step, which means that you've pre-qualified a company. But for the past 2-3 years, you've never really done any business with this company. Now you have a need to do a business and you want to invite that company to the bid. Best practices you need to do the evaluation. A lot of things will have changed in 2 years, in 3 years. This is a matter of policy. It's also a matter of risk appetite. A lot of organizations standardize by 2 years. So they say, if I've pre-qualified you and I've not used you in 2 years, I archive you. One of the reasons of archiving is to free up storage space. You know, we talked about storage in that instance. These things cost money, it's not free. So you don't want to carry data and information of companies that are really adding value to your business. So you need a policy around it as well. We qualify after a period of idleness or archiving to make that decision. And then even if this is an active business that you're doing business with, once an acquisition happens or a divestment happens, right, it's really important to pay attention to the movements in the organizations that you deal with. If something that significant happens, you probably want to do a requalification. Was a significant change that happened in the organization of the past 5 years. Okay. So in terms of next steps, what I'll leave you with, whatever it is that you've learned here today, I hope that it has been worth a while. And I'm hoping that you make a commitment today, even if you're not in a position to kick off right away, and something to definitely put out the goal or something to achieve your position. And then you can start small. Maybe you start to focus on the high risk services that you buy. There are some free templates that you can check out to see. Just start to collect data and see how you can use the data to make decisions. It will be helpful that you start to do this manually if you can. But like I said, not sustainable if you don't have the proper ERP to support your business. Okay. So that's all I have to share today. I hope it has been worth your time. Thank you very much. I'll be to Atinike now and then we'll probably take any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anthony. I believe we've all gotten value from this webinar. Can we at least give some reactions or comments in the chat box for all those that followed and actually believe they've gotten something from this? Thank you very, very much. On this note, I'll proceed with a brief introduction about Dun Bradstreet, starting from here. Like I said earlier, D&B is the organizer of this webinar. Please confirm if you can see my screen. Okay. Okay. So why clients work with Dun Bradstreet? Basically, Dun Bradstreet currently owns and manages the biggest database on businesses all over the world, with records on 604 million companies globally. That includes countries and territories that are not yet recognized as countries. D&B has the world's largest commercial trade payment network. We work with over 90% of Fortune 500 companies. We carry out over 2 million updates on the information in the database annually. And there are over 1.4 million match points in the database that we currently hold. We have extensive data, both seemingly significant and big information. And we partner with most of the key data points all over the world to provide insights, not just data, to the companies that we work with. D&B has a solution called VendR, which is a third-party management system. From what Mr. Anthony had said, he's talked about companies using an ERP for their vendor selection process. D&B has come up with VendR to provide this solution using and banking on the database that we currently own. So what is VendR? I believe some of the companies on this webinar will have come across VendR. They probably have been requested to register, or they probably found information about it at one point or the other. So the VendR is an online access tool, both for vendors as well as procurement managers, where they can get, for the procurement managers, it's an access point where they can get verified information on all their current vendors if they are subscribed to the platform, as well as alternate vendors. It gives them an overview of supplier database. We help to clean the information that they have on the vendors, and we help to validate the information available about the vendors. Like Mr. Anthony said, he said bad vendors don't just cost you, they don't just disappoint you, they cost you real money and they cost you time. And if a business is not careful, it can actually cost them the business in the long run. Now, on the VendR platform, businesses are required to provide certain documents and information about their business, which Dun Bradstreet will validate, after which they will be onboarded to the platform and assigned a DUNS number. The VendR platform has 3 different interfaces, one being the supplier or vendors interface where the vendors themselves register, the other being the procurement interface where procurement managers can access vendors that are registered on the platform, and the third being the admin page where D&B manages information on vendors on the platform. This is what it looks like. It helps vendors to gain visibility. It provides 360-degree view on companies, and it helps procurement managers to have access to alternate vendors that they can do business with. So they're not just restricted with vendors that have indicated interest to work with them. They can also access vendors that provide the kind of goods or service they might be interested in at even cheaper costs to what their vendors are currently providing them. Who are the main targets for the vendor's main target? Basically, when a vendor is trying to get business, a vendor wants increased turnover. They want to establish that they are credible so that they can become a supplier and be able to build a relationship with the companies they are working with. They want customer retention. So a vendor wants to be able to have access to work with a company over a long period of time. They also want opportunities for cross-selling, so that if there are affiliates or subsidiaries of their initial clients, they can also have access to work with such company. For those in the oil and gas industry, Supplier just acquired an arm of Mobile, where we have Sepno now. So vendors to Supplier can have opportunities to also work with Sepno. For the procurement managers, it helps with risk management. Dun Bradstreet being a global company, helping you to
do the first step, the pre-qualification of your vendors, gives you the confidence that a level of risk has been reduced in your dealings with suppliers or vendors, as the case might be. You can readily count on an available network of alternate vendors. All you need to do is log into the platform, search for the vendors, the product or service you might be interested to work on. It helps you to avoid sanctions because you can always say that you've had a third-party company that has helped you to check on this vendor before you worked on them. There are cases globally of companies being sanctioned because a supplier is probably using child labor or involved in money laundering. Having D&B to help you carry out the pre-qualification on your vendor helps you to eliminate this risk to some level. It helps with cost efficiency because a procurement manager will be able to identify companies that are part of a group and consolidate your procurement or your requests to this set of companies. So a procurement manager can negotiate better when working with the same company or group of companies over time. And then you can have access to a variety of manufacturers, traders of products that you need for procurement processes. So it reduces the costs you incur in sourcing for vendors at the end of the day. We have a number of companies that have done to the VendR at the moment. For those that are in the power and energy sector, Ikeja Electric is a major company that has required that their vendors first be pre-qualified by D&B before they work with them. This is their vendor registration section on their website. Another one is Walter Smith in the oil and gas sector, where the DUNS number is a mandatory requirement on their website before a vendor can be onboarded on the platform. That is a brief about D&B. We have several other companies on the platform. We have the likes of Dangote in manufacturing industry. We have Nigerian breweries for FMCGs as well. And we have banks. We have Jais Bank as well. For procurement managers that are interested in seeing a demo, please, you can drop your email address or contact information in the chat or send us an email after this, and we'll be willing to provide a demo session for your team. For vendors or prospective suppliers that want to register, you can do the same or send us an email to info_Nigeria@dnbsame.com. info_Nigeria@dnbsame.com. Or you can contact us via phone on 0704 338 7900. We will drop all this information in the chat room for anybody that wants to reach us after now. Now we go to the Q&A section. For those that have dropped their questions in the chat room, the ones that are many, it will respond to them while we will also answer some questions. We have some minutes to go. Please, if you want to speak, kindly raise your hand so that we can unmute you, but we want this to be as fast and as short as possible. Please summarize your question straight to the point so we can have enough time for others to answer their questions. Thank you, everyone. Please, if you have questions, you can raise your hand, or you can drop your question in the chat room, the Q&A room. Okay. For the person asking about the presentation slides, we will send a recording of this session to everybody after now. But the presentation slide itself, for intellectual property purposes, we will not be able to share that, but we will definitely send you the recording. Okay. Does anybody else have any question, comment, or clarification? Ensuring that we have not just data about vendors, but insights on what all the data points mean is very, very key, as Mr. Anthony had said earlier. And in the age we are going to, data and information is very, very important. Like you said, caveat emptor, buyers beware. A buyer cannot say they were not aware of the circumstances or the capability of a vendor that they choose to work with. Globally, it is becoming very, very costly for companies to engage or work with just any other company without doing some level of checks on such companies. Okay. I'm seeing some questions in the chat room. Does DMB provide data insight on new products introduction to the market? Ayomide Adesanya, can you please provide a bit more insight on this? I don't seem to quite get the question clearly. Can you raise your hand so you can be unmuted to ask this question? Emmanuel Edward is asking, do you have any certification program for procurement management? Directly, DMB does not have any certification program in terms of training for procurement managers, because I believe CIP, that's Chartered Institute of Procurement, procurement manager, CIPM, I believe, does that already. So DMB does not necessarily provide certification for procurement managers. Ayomide Adesanya, can you please raise your hand to provide a bit more clarity on this question? If anyone else has any question, please go ahead and put this in the chat box or raise your hand. We have just about 4 minutes more to go. Okay. Who do you as an market student? Okay, so there's a question from Nancy Njoku Atta. Who do you as an organization market to? The vendors or procuring company? What would be the value proposition to a vendor except they are trying to get business from a particular company that has your vetting process as a requirement? Okay. So for this question, D&B primarily markets to procurement teams. However, vendors can also use the opportunity to register on the platform because the platform can be accessed by several procurement teams, such that when they need alternate vendors, they log in, they search for the product or service, and they can contact the vendor directly to make inquiries or requests for proposals, basically. So for the vendors, what they get is an opportunity to show that they are credible companies, an opportunity to be seen and being able to be contacted by procurement teams that they might not even be aware of or try to market to initially. It gives you an opportunity for cross-selling. So if you're already working with one client, other procurement managers can see you on the platform and contact you to do business with you. Then, okay, can you share what other industries you operate in? Yes, we operate in healthcare. We have FHI, IHV. That's FHI is Family Health International. IHV, that's Institute of Human Virology, that currently use our platform as well. Any last comments, Mr. Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, my final comment would be that I hope that what we've discussed here today was helpful. And of course, I would highly recommend embracing one of these solutions. You might need it now in order to be able to sell. But I saw a question in the comment that was still around, do I only need this where my client requires it of me? Well, yes, that's one of it. But aside that, you also need to manage the risk within your own supply chain as well, because many times you need to buy in order to sell. Okay? So I want to think about it as something that is a must for a business. That it's a tool that is to add value as far as so don't only look at embracing it if the client requires it. It should be a standard that your business should aspire to. And that will be my final comment. I wish you all a productive rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anthony. Thank you, everyone that has joined. For those that joined late, you will definitely get a recording of the session, and everybody will get a certificate of participation after this meeting. Thank you very much for your time. Do enjoy the rest of the day. See you next time.